Welcome back to World History Explore. Albania's journey from communism to democracy is nothing short of a dramatic saga. From decades of totalitarian grip to the hope of a democratic future, the small Balkan nation faced a transformation that shook every corner of its society. But how did this shift begin? And what did it take to rebuild a country left in ruins by a repressive regime? Stay tuned, because today we're diving into the incredible story of Albania's transition from communism to democracy, where each chapter is more surprising than the last. So with that said, let's start. The shadow of Hoxha's rule. For almost 50 years, Albania was suffocated under Enver Hoxha's iron-fisted rule. Isolated from the world and declared an atheist state, Albania became Europe's hermit. Hoxha's communist regime controlled every aspect of life, turning the country into one of the most backward and impoverished in Europe. Widespread poverty, severe restrictions on freedom, and a crumbling economy marked the daily lives of Albanians. By the 1980s, the country was on the brink of collapse, but the fall of communism across Eastern Europe lit a spark of hope. Could Albania escape the darkness too? In 1991, history took a sharp turn. For the first time in decades, Albanians participated in multi-party elections, a momentous shift from the one-party stranglehold of the past. The collapse of the communist regime was not just political, it was personal for every Albanian who had endured years of oppression. As democratic institutions began to take shape, Albanians dared to dream of freedom. But democracy didn't arrive smoothly. The road was bumpy, lined with economic turmoil, political unrest, and societal upheaval. Hyperinflation and unemployment hit hard, and many questioned if democracy was worth the struggle. Yet despite the chaos, there was no turning back. Albania's shift from a centrally planned economy to a market-based system was like navigating a minefield. Factories that once symbolized communist pride stood abandoned, and state-owned enterprises crumbled under mismanagement. The country faced hyperinflation, and unemployment soared. However, the reforms eventually bore fruit. Foreign investments began trickling in, and a wave of privatization spurred economic growth. Slowly but surely, the seeds of capitalism started to sprout in Albania's soil. The fall of communism also sparked a mass exodus. Thousands of Albanians fled the country in search of better opportunities abroad. This migration transformed families and communities, with many relying on remittances sent back home. While this brain drain posed challenges, it also brought new perspectives and resources, helping Albania stabilize during its tumultuous transition. The journey to democracy wasn't just about fixing internal issues, it was about looking outward. Albania set its sights on Europe, aiming for integration with the European Union. This aspiration drove crucial reform, from improving human rights to aligning laws with EU standards. Although full EU membership remains a goal, Albania's progress on this front has been undeniable. Albania's awakening. For decades, Albania was a land locked in isolation, ruled by the iron fist of Enver Hoxha. His totalitarian regime controlled every facet of life, turning the nation into a Stalinist stronghold. Religion was outlawed, dissent crushed, and fear became the air people breathed. By the late 1980s, Albania was Europe's most isolated and impoverished nation. Hunger, despair, and silence ruled the streets. But beneath that silence, a storm was brewing. Hoxha's death in 1985 marked the beginning of a slow unraveling. Ramiz Alia, his successor, attempted reforms. He loosened some restrictions, restored ties with the West, and opened the door to foreign investment. Yet these changes barely scratched the surface of a society suffocating under decades of repression. The economy spiraled further, and public discontent simmered dangerously close to the surface. By December 1990, the simmering pot boiled over. University students, fed up with crumbling infrastructure and a lack of basic freedoms, took to the streets of Tirana. Their demands started with better living conditions, but quickly grew into a movement demanding an end to communist rule. Thousands joined their cause, inspired by similar uprisings sweeping Eastern Europe. The government's grip on power began to slip. These protests weren't just acts of defiance, they were cries for survival. The students' bravery ignited a flame of resistance across Albania. In the face of growing unrest, opposition voices found a platform. December 1990 saw the birth of the Democratic Party, Albania's first real challenge to the ruling Communist Party of Labor. This new coalition represented a fractured but determined populace yearning for change. Feeling the heat, Ali's government made a historic concession. Opposition parties were legalized. For the first time in decades, Albanians could openly express dissent without fear of execution or imprisonment. Political pluralism was no longer a dream, but a fragile reality. Independent media outlets sprang up, amplifying voices that had been silenced for years. Then came the elections of March 1991. These were no ordinary elections. They were a battleground between old power and new hope. Despite the introduction of multi-party democracy, the ruling Party of Labor clung to power, rebranding itself as the Socialist Party. Manipulation and media control ensured their temporary victory, but the cracks in their foundation were evident. The people weren't buying the facade. Strikes erupted nationwide, with miners leading the charge. Their demands were simple: a government that served the people, not the other way around. These protests exposed the deep chasm between the ruling elite and a populace unwilling to endure further suffering. The momentum for change was unstoppable. By 1992, the communists faced a decisive defeat, and Albania began its journey toward democracy. What unfolded from 1990 to 1991 was more than political upheaval. It was a nation reclaiming its voice. From the students who sparked the revolution to the workers who kept the fire alive, Albania's fall of communism was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of hope. The journey wasn't without pain, but it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A fragile but determined path toward freedom, revolution, and reality. The year was 1992. Decades of communist rule had left the nation crippled, its people simmering with frustration over unpaid wages, spiraling inflation, and an economy teetering on the brink of collapse. By January, this tension boiled over into a massive general strike, a collective cry for change that brought the country to a standstill. Workers, students, and intellectuals rallied together, their voices echoing through the streets, demanding an end to the Socialist Party's reign. It was clear change was no longer a choice, it was a necessity. The socialist government, cornered and shaken, had little choice but to call for new elections. On March 22, 1992, history was made. For the first time since the fall of communism, Albanians cast their votes in free and fair elections. The results sent shockwaves through the nation. The Democratic Party of Albania, led by Sali Berisha, claimed a decisive victory with 62% of the vote. Hit the subscribe button and like this video so you can stay in the loop. Pyramid schemes, protests, and reforms. Albania's post-communist journey from 1992 to 2001 was nothing short of a roller coaster, a tale of ambitious reforms, bitter challenges, and outright chaos. Emerging from the shadows of centralized control, Albania's attempt to transform into a market economy began with a promising start, but quickly unraveled into political strife and economic disaster. Let's dive into this gripping period that shaped modern Albania. The fall of communism in 1991 marked the beginning of Albania's daring shift to a market economy. For decades, every aspect of life had been dictated by rigid 5-year plans, suffocating any dreams of private entrepreneurship. But by 1992, the newly elected Democratic Party had launched sweeping reforms to undo the damage of the past. Price controls vanished, state enterprises were privatized, and a legal framework for private businesses began to take shape. Agriculture led the charge, with private farming becoming a beacon of hope. GDP growth soared to astonishing heights, over 119% by 1995, and inflation plummeted. For a moment, it seemed like the country was finally stepping into a brighter future. But there was a darker side to this newfound freedom. The rush to privatize left thousands jobless as inefficient state industries shut down. Corruption spread like wildfire, with organized crime filling the void left by weak institutions. And then came the pyramid schemes, a ticking time bomb that would shatter public trust and financial stability. While the economy was wobbling, politics in Albania were spiraling into chaos. The Democratic Party, initially hailed as reformers, started to show authoritarian tendencies. Under Sali Berisha's leadership, power was consolidated, dissent was crushed, and elections were manipulated. Allegations of vote rigging in 1996 sparked massive protests, with citizens accusing the government of betraying the democratic ideals it had promised. This political turmoil only fueled public anger. By the end of 1996, frustration boiled over as the economy faltered and people demanded accountability. The stage was set for an explosive collapse. 1997 brought the nightmare to life. The collapse of widespread pyramid schemes, shady operations that had drained the savings of nearly two-thirds of Albanians, triggered chaos. With $1.2 billion lost, the public's outrage turned violent. Towns like Vlore and Lushni became hotbeds of rebellion as armed protests erupted. Government authority crumbled, with police and military forces either fleeing or joining the insurgents. Looting and violence became the norm, plunging the nation into anarchy. Armed groups took control of entire regions, and Albania's fragile institutions buckled under the pressure. The financial dreams that the schemes had promised had turned into a national nightmare. By March 1997, the situation was dire enough to warrant international intervention. The United Nations authorized Operation Pelican, aimed at providing humanitarian aid and stabilizing the chaos. Food and medical supplies poured in, while international forces worked to restore some semblance of order. This intervention laid the groundwork for a political transition. Elections in June 1997 brought changes to Albania's leadership, offering a glimmer of hope amid the ruins. NATO and the European Union stepped in to assist in rebuilding institutions and paving the way for economic recovery. Albania's journey through this tumultuous decade left scars, but also important lessons. The transition to a market economy showcased the potential for growth, but also the dangers of unregulated systems. Political polarization underscored the fragility of young democracies. In the early 2000s, Albania was inching toward stability, but the memory of this era remains a stark reminder of how quickly dreams can turn into chaos when reforms outpace the foundations needed to support them. Breaking the chains. Albania's journey from a repressive communist regime to a growing democracy is nothing short of dramatic. Between 2001 and 2021, the country experienced sweeping political shifts, societal reckonings, and a relentless pursuit of European integration. Each milestone reflected not just progress, but the resilience of a nation determined to redefine itself. The early 2000s marked a pivotal phase for Albania's democracy. In 2001, the Socialist Party reclaimed power, pledging stability after years of unrest. However, it was the 2005 elections that stunned many. Sali Berish's Democratic Party ousted the Socialists, signaling a public demand for reform. Berisha's administration championed European integration and economic progress, but not without controversy. Subsequent elections in 2009, 2013, and 2017 were marred by allegations of vote buying and manipulation. Still, international observers acknowledged gradual improvements in fairness and transparency. By 2021, Edi Rama's Socialist Party had secured an unprecedented third term, leveraging reforms like electronic voter identification. Yet the electoral process continued to face accusations of fraud, reflecting a political environment often divided along party lines. This polarization frequently spilled onto the streets, with protests becoming a common sight. Even as democracy matured, the struggle between the socialists and Democrats often overshadowed efforts to address Albania's deeper issues. The shadow of Albania's communist era loomed large. From 1944 to 1991, Enver Hoxha's regime imposed brutal repression, leaving scars that time alone could not heal. Post-1991, the country grappled with reconciling its painful past. Commissions were established to investigate human rights abuses, offering victims a platform to share their stories. However, societal divisions over how to address these crimes often hindered progress. Efforts to educate younger generations about the atrocities faced resistance, as political loyalties continued to color narratives of the past. Memorials and educational campaigns aimed at fostering understanding struggled against this backdrop of polarization. Albania's quest for reconciliation remained unfinished, a reminder of the lingering challenges of transition. Albania's aspirations for EU membership drove much of its reform agenda during this period. Gaining candidate status in 2014 was a landmark moment, but it came with a list of demands: combating corruption, judicial reform, and improving human rights protections. Progress reports from the European Commission highlighted incremental achievements, yet also pointed to systemic issues. Corruption within government institutions persisted, undermining public trust. Nevertheless, Albania's commitment to aligning with EU standards kept the dream alive. The formal start of accession negotiations in 2022 signaled international recognition of Albania's efforts. This milestone underscored that while challenges remained, the nation was firmly on the path toward integration. The road ahead for Albania is far from smooth. Political polarization remains a significant obstacle, stalling effective governance. Corruption continues to plague institutions, while economic disparities leave many citizens disillusioned. However, the pursuit of EU membership offers hope. The promise of integration provides not just a roadmap for reform, but a sense of direction for a country seeking stability and prosperity. Albania's transformation from a closed, totalitarian state to a democracy is a testament to its people's resilience. Despite setbacks, each election, can Albania's democracy still thrive, or are there more challenges ahead? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video of World History Explored.